The night was quiet, just another routine stop. At least, that's what Officer Daniels thought when he pulled over the black woman in the sleek black SUV. He barely glanced at her license before his tone turned sharp, his voice laced with authority. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. But the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she stared at him with a calm, steady gaze. There was something about her presence that unsettled him. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" she asked, her voice firm but respectful. Daniels didn't have a real reason, and he knew it. But his pride, his uniform, his authority, it all demanded control. "Step out," he repeated, this time with more force. When she did, he moved closer, his hand hovering near his belt. A smirk played on his lips. "You think you're above the law." Then she said it, two words that stopped him cold. "I'm captain." His face twisted with confusion. "Captain." "Police captain," she clarified, pulling out her badge. His smirk faded, but instead of backing down, he made a choice, one that would change everything. And in the next few seconds, he'd realize he'd picked the wrong person to mess with. For a moment, there was silence. Officer Daniels stared at the badge in her hand, his jaw tightening. He'd been in situations like this before, pulling over someone he assumed had no power, no voice. But this was different. This wasn't just anyone. This was a police captain, and now she was looking at him like she was waiting for him to make his next move. But Daniels wasn't the type to back down. His pride wouldn't let him. He scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't care who you are," he muttered. "You still answer to me right now." His fingers twitched near his belt, his stance widening as he tried to regain control. The woman, Captain Reynolds, didn't move. She stood firm, her expression unreadable. But inside, she was already reading him. She'd dealt with men like Daniels before. She knew his type, the ones who thought their badge gave them unchecked power, who let ego cloud their judgment. "What exactly did I do wrong?" she asked, her tone cool but pointed. Daniels didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, tension crackling between them. He thought he had control of the situation. He had no idea how wrong he was. Daniels could feel the control slipping through his fingers, and it made his pulse quicken. He wasn't used to this. Someone standing their ground, especially not like this. The street was empty, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows around them. His hand hovered near his belt, a subtle warning, but Captain Reynolds didn't even flinch. That only made him more frustrated. "I asked you a question," she repeated, her voice steady. "What did I do wrong?" Daniels knew he didn't have a real answer. He hadn't even run her plates yet. This stop had been about something else, an assumption, a feeling, a power move. Now that move was backfiring, and he was scrambling. His authority was supposed to be enough. "License and registration," he snapped, trying to regain his footing. Reynolds let out a slow breath, then handed them over. Daniels barely glanced at them before tossing them back. It was all a game to him now, a test of dominance. "Step back to the curb," he ordered, but there was hesitation in his voice. She raised an eyebrow, catching it. "You're nervous." That struck a nerve. His jaw clenched, and for a split second, his next move could go in any direction, and Reynolds knew it. Daniels' grip tightened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The street was still empty, but the silence between them was deafening. Captain Reynolds didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, watching him, waiting. It made his skin crawl. He was supposed to be in control. That's how this was supposed to go. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't. Reynolds shifted slightly, just enough to make him react. His hand twitched, fingers brushing over his belt, and she caught it. "You don't know what to do next, do you?" she asked, her voice almost too calm. Daniels scoffed, shaking his head. "I know exactly what to do," he snapped, but the doubt in his own voice betrayed him. Reynolds took a step closer. "Then do it." His breath hitched. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He was waiting for fear, for hesitation. But there was none. She wasn't scared of him. And that shook something deep inside him. His frustration boiled over, his pride screaming for action. And then he made his move. It happened fast, too fast. And in the next heartbeat, everything changed. Daniels lunged, reaching for Reynolds, but before he could even register what was happening, she moved. Fast, too fast for him to react. In one sharp motion, she sidestepped, deflecting his grasp with ease. His balance wavered, his own momentum working against him. His heart pounded. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Reynolds didn't step back. She didn't retreat. She squared her shoulders and met his eyes, her presence commanding. "Bad decision," she said, her voice low. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He couldn't let this happen. Not here, not like this. His authority, his pride, it was slipping through his fingers like sand. Anger surged inside him, but before he could react again, the sudden flash of red and blue lights filled the street. A patrol car. Reynolds glanced toward the approaching vehicle, her expression unreadable. Daniel swallowed hard, his mind racing. Backup wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't called anyone. Then, as the car rolled to a stop, the real twist hit him. The officer stepping out wasn't just any cop. It was someone who knew exactly who Captain Reynolds was. And from the look on their face, they also knew exactly who Daniels was and what he had just done. Daniel's breath caught as the patrol car door swung open. The officer stepping out moved with purpose, their expression unreadable, but there was no mistaking the weight of the moment. Reynolds didn't turn away, didn't flinch. She already knew how this was going to play out. Daniels, on the other hand, felt his stomach tighten. His hands curled into fists at his sides as the officer approached. "Captain Reynolds," the officer said with a nod, their voice calm but firm. Daniels blinked, his mind scrambling. They knew her. Personally, he could see it in their eyes. Reynolds nodded back. "Officer Miller." Miller's gaze shifted to Daniels, scanning him from head to toe. "Everything okay here?" Daniels opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Reynolds held up a hand. "Actually, no," she said, locking eyes with Daniels. "This officer attempted to detain me without cause." Her voice was steady, unwavering. Daniels felt the ground beneath him shift. Miller's jaw tightened. They turned to Daniels, their expression hardening. "That true?" Daniels shook his head quickly. "No, But his words faltered. There was no way to explain what had just happened. No excuse that wouldn't expose the truth. Reynolds took a step forward, her presence undeniable. "Check his body cam," she said simply. Daniels felt the blood drain from his face. His body cam. He had forgotten about it in the heat of the moment. His own footage would tell the story. Every word, every action, every mistake. Miller's radio crackled. More units were on the way. This was it. The moment Daniels had spent years avoiding. Then, just as the weight of it all settled, Reynolds spoke again. "You made a choice tonight, Officer Daniels." She let the words hang in the air. "And now you're going to live with it." Daniels stood frozen as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. His career, his reputation, everything was crumbling right in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Daniels stood frozen as the sirens grew louder, the flashing lights bouncing off the nearby buildings. His mind raced for a way out, but there wasn't one. The body cam footage was there, the truth lay bare. He had crossed a line, and now, for the first time, he was the one answering for it. Miller didn't say another word. They simply gestured for Daniels to step back. The weight of the moment settled on him as he realized what was happening. His career, everything he had built, was slipping away in real time. He looked at Reynolds, expecting some kind of satisfaction on her face, but there was none, just calm, just certainty. Reynolds sighed and shook her head. It didn't have to be this way. Daniels didn't respond. He had nothing left to say. As another officer stepped forward, preparing to take over, Reynolds turned away, walking back toward her car. She had seen this before, ego, power, bad decisions catching up in the end. And now Daniels had to face it. She got into her SUV, exhaled, and drove away. Behind her, the flashing lights remained, but she didn't need to look back. The story was already over.